what we have seen regarding content manager here, well, not here, but in the admin controller, was just fetching by ID. So this is super simple, but there are a few other interesting methods as well. So let's just create a quick and dirty controller action for that. I won't create a nice display, but we will just look at the whole stuff from the debugger. So this will be a void action, and let's call it person list queries. Because if you go back to the content manager, we will, well, let's take a look at all the methods that are there. Well, we have seen build display. Build editor is the same as build display, but it will display an editor form for the content item. Clear, well, you basically don't need to use that most of the time. Clone is, well, go figure. Okay, I will tell you, well, it's cloning content items. I know, shocking. Complete import, I actually see this the first time, so don't know. Create. Now, create is something corresponding to new, because as I mentioned, new won't persist the content item. It just creates a new content item object, and the stress here is on object. It doesn't create a new content item per se. Now, this create will actually persist the content item. So the idea is that first you create a content item object with new, you fill it with data, and then you persist it with content manager.create. Now, why is these two things? The reason is that you might not want to persist the content item. For example, if you fill it with data, then halfway you recognize that the data is not fully valid because, for example, it comes from some user input, and the user used some letters instead of a phone number or something like that. Then you don't want to persist it. Or, and this is some more advanced scenario, you might want to use content item objects to build dynamic pages, dynamic layouts. Well, I wouldn't say layouts because it's a technical term and its own, but dynamic pages. So a page where different modules can compose it just as a content item, but it's not a persistent content item, it's just a displayed page somewhere. And there is more. There's destroy, which well, completely removes a content item from the system. It completely wipes it out from every table. And the pair of that is remove, which just soft deletes a content item. That means that the content item will be hidden from users, also from administrators, well, most of the time, but the data will actually remain in the database. And the content item will be possible to be restored. But there are some more not so interesting methods, but which is the most interesting here is query, because this is probably that you need most after fetching when interacting with content items. What is query? Well, content items are data, and these data points are in a database. So naturally, we don't just want to fetch them by ID when we want to read back the data that we save to the database, but we also want to arbitrarily filter content items we want to see, and well, queries for that. So that's pretty much how pretty much the same notion as SQL queries. Well, it's a very similar notion. It's not exactly the same, because this is a content query. So let's do some querying. For example, well, let's go back to our content list, and let's see which personal list items we have. Well, we know that there's just one. So let's do some querying, but for that we will need another person list. So we have at least some basic set of content items. So let's create another person list. Let's call it test person list 2, and that's because we have a lot of imagination. And this person list, let's make it display males because it was females before, and the maximum number of persons, well, let it be 4. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. So now we have actually 2 person lists. That's great because now we can query. How do we query? Well, the query methods of the content manager can be used like that, but it also has some overloads that make it more useful. And one of the overloads requires content type names. So the basic idea here is that when you start a query, you start with all the content items in the system, and then you gradually filter out those that you actually want. So, for example, here we can filter for content type names. Well, our content type name here is person list, so we'll filter for that. And the object that this query method returns is an iContent query, so that's not yet enough. We need to do something to actually list those content items. And if we change some methods on this opening query method, you'll actually see some methods that might be interesting for us. For example, there is a count. So let's determine how many person lists are there. Let me just copy this, because there is also a list method. Well, the list method is just a simple method. It will return every content item in the query. Or you could use slice, which will do almost the same, except that it can be used for paging. As you can see, it has 2 parameters. One is how many items to skip and how many to retrieve. So for example, if I say 02, that means that no content items will be skipped. We start with the first one, and we will retrieve 2 content items. So in this case, we will get all the person list items. But I could also say, just retrieve 1 person list. Or I could say, start with, let's skip 1 person list and then retrieve another one. So, well, let's actually try that. I will do a save and put a breakpoint here. And after this reloads and the compilation happens in the background, we will take a look at what we have done in the debugger. But now we need to access not the person list dashboard, but rather the person list queries method, which actually works. It's a void, so we don't see anything. But now I'm attaching the debugger to this ISExpress process. And let's do a reload. I will just close these unnecessary windows. And if you take a look at the person list count variable, you can see it's 2, so that's correct. We just have 2 person lists in the system. And if you take a look at the person lists IEnumerable, it just has 1 person list. And by the way, some pro tip here. Obviously, you have the debugger at your hand, so do be brave and use it if you can't figure out something. You have the whole source code of Orchard in the solution, so that should help. You have the debugger, so you are able to look into every piece of data, check what's in there if you are looking for something. You can also step through code and see how it executes. So you feel free to explore Orchard. It's also a quite good experience, but it gives you good experience to be a better developer. So for example, here we have this single content item, and you can dig into it. So what's inside the content item object? Well, we assume from the admin that the content item object has content parts, or a content type has content parts. So a content item object also has parts, but these are instances now. And actually we can see all the parts that we added to that content type, including title part and including our own person list part. That's also here. If we go into title part, for example, we see that it has the property title. So that's actually the title of the content item. Nothing magical here. You can drill down into the content item and into the content item object and see how it's built up, where the pieces of data are. So for example, what you need to access if you are looking for the title. And this way we can actually also check that the slice worked, because the first person list was skipped and we just retrieved the second one. There is a lot more to querying. Feel free to explore it yourself, or you can take a look at it in the training demo, obviously.